everybody. My name is Connor Flanagan. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Southampton History Museum. And this morning we are joined by our archivist, Mary Cummings. Mary has been working diligently throughout the year, putting together a bunch of great lectures for us last year. And now we're starting our new lecture series, 20th Century Influencers. The first one we'll be talking about today is Jane Wilson, artist of the Ethereal. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it on over to Mary, and I'll pop back in at the end to answer any questions we might have. Take it away, Mary.
Thanks, Connor. And thanks for joining me, everyone, for this talk on the artist Jane Wilson. Jane Wilson is best known for her luminous landscapes that hover between abstraction and representation. She once told an interviewer that the challenge she faced in her work was to capture on canvas, quote, moments of strong sensation, moments of total physical experience of the landscape when weather just reaches out and sucks you in, close quotes. When you think about it, she added, trying to trigger those moments with pigments of ground up earth, it's really very mysterious. In the later years of her long career as a painter, Wilson focused almost uniquely on triggering those moments of transcendence when the weather activating her vast atmospheric skies is not just seen, but palpably felt. Born in 1924, Wilson grew up on a farm beneath the wide skies of Iowa farm country, and spoke later of the great weight of the sky and how it rests on the earth. The farm had come down to her father from his father, and her mother was a published novelist and poet. As an adult, Jane would gravitate to New York City, where she and her husband, John Jonas Gruen, would be part of New York's mid-century bohemian world. Then, when they bought a carriage house in Watermill, and began spending summers in eastern Long Island, the flat potato fields running right down to the sea reawakened her love of the uninterrupted landscape. And like many another artist, she was struck by the area's fabled light. The paintings inspired by the sea, land, and light around Watermill are still far in the future in 1941, when Wilson enrolls at the age of 17 at the University of Iowa to study painting and art history. The art department at the university, previously led by 1930s allegorical regionalist painter Grant Wood, was being revolutionized to expose the students to what was going on in New York City, including the first glimmerings of abstract expressionism. The department head would travel to New York and bring back paintings ranging from the expressionist Max Beckmann to the upstart Jackson Pollock. Whoops. Another influence is the artist Philip Guston, who was the university's artist in residence from 1941 to 1945. A painter, he's also known for his drawings, murals, and prints, and is currently the subject of an important retrospective. In the early 1940s, Guston is enthralled to early Renaissance Italian painter Piero della Francesca. He impresses Wilson with his seeming obliviousness to all but his art. Here was this handsome hulk of a man, she later related, whose mind was so concentrated on his own reality that he didn't seem so much a part of the daily world. His inner world took precedence over absolutely everything else. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa, Jane remains at the university to teach art history for another 2 years. Then one day, she's at the lectern teaching a class on Oriental art when, in a life-altering moment, the exotically handsome young student who's been impatiently maneuvering to catch her eye finally succeeds. John Gruen is barely 20 when he falls madly in love with the stunning 22-year-old Jane Wilson on sight. He enrolls in her class and makes himself as conspicuous as possible. And once the ice is broken, his romantic passion proves irresistible and contagious. Tall, dark-haired, and with a continental flair he acquired from his cultured Jewish family and their enforced European travels during the Hitler era, Gruen is full of nervous energy. And as he later acknowledged, he's full of vague, outer-directed emotions and ambitions for cultural and social achievements. When we met, he wrote in his book, The Party's Over Now, which is a lively and very candid memoir of the 1950s, Jane's inner life, he said, was far more complicated than mine. Up to then, Jane had seemed set on a path toward achieving her artistic goals in a fairly quiet, if determined fashion. Growing up on the farm, as she later recalled, she had roamed its wide expanses alone, developing a deep relationship with the natural elements that would remain such a strong influence on her art. She was understandably a shy and self-involved child. Then, when as a young woman of 22, she's suddenly the object of John Gruen's outsized passion, there's never any threat to her ambitions as an artist, but it does mean the end of anything resembling a quiet life. On the evening of March 28, 1948, a tiny wedding party arrives at the Oskaloosa Congregational Church to celebrate the nuptials of Jane Wilson and John Gruen. Gruen, with no patience for the advice of family and friends who are aghast at what they view as youthful impetuosity, is deliriously happy. Wilson, ravishing in a white suit trimmed with silver fox, is clearly in love, but visibly anxious at taking such a consequential step at top speed. Her jitters are only magnified when John's best man, his brother Martin, fails to appear. After waiting as long as possible, the decision is made to carry on and proceed without him. And the soon-to-be husband and wife start slowly down the aisle towards the altar. 3 feet from their destination, Jane slumps to the floor in a faint. John, horrified, is momentarily paralyzed. But when Jane's mother rushes to her daughter's side and pronounces the whole affair a terrible mistake, he regains his composure. He shoos her and the others away. In the end, Jane revives, insists on going ahead with the ceremony, and the inauspicious incident is never mentioned again. There's no question where the couple will live as soon as they can extricate themselves from Iowa. Bound for glory, they head for New York City's Greenwich Village, the one place where their lack of money and their high hopes will not be out of place in a neighborhood of free-spirited, arts-oriented bohemians. What they find when they look for an apartment is a parlor floor, 1 room, at 319 West 12th Street with, quote, cooking privileges, but no kitchen, a bathroom down the hall, a gloomy interior, and a rent of $12 a week. A working fireplace is its best feature, but it's not long before John reports that the dismal decor has succumbed to Jane's artistry. She paints the walls white, adds bunches of flowers, and resumes painting, producing works to hang on the walls. Unable to find a position with a salary that would make teaching worthwhile, Jane devotes her time to painting diligently in the tiny apartment, doing mostly figures, still lifes, and imaginary landscapes. Evenings are often spent at the famous Cedar Bar. Unimpressive except for its neighborhood clientele of hardworking, hard-drinking artists, the bar brings the Gruens together with some who will become lifelong friends, including artist Jane Freilacher, Larry Rivers, Joan Mitchell, Grace Hardigan, and poets Frank O'Hara and John Ashbery. Watching Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning drink and talk art late into the night is the bar's main attraction, and a few of the women artists provide themselves on matching the men drink for drink. Not Jane, who could not shed her aura of elegance if she wanted to. Reflecting later on the scene at the Cedar Bar and her place in it, she said she had floated around the periphery, unwilling to participate in what she called the scrappiness. She may not be engaged in the bar's rowdiness, but is nevertheless susceptible to the pull of abstract expressionism, which dominates the discourse there and is about to dominate the art world. It's not easy in the early 50s for young, as yet unknown artists to find a gallery willing to show their work. At mid-century, the art world is fairly small and very closed. The big name uptown galleries are giving important shows to the artists who have broken through to become heroes of abstract expressionism. But for the young artists experimenting downtown, it's increasingly obvious that they will have to create their own opportunities. What happens next is the dawn of a downtown art scene, spearheaded by artists' cooperatives. At Cedar Bar one evening, Jane is approached to join one of the first to be launched, the Hansa Gallery, and she becomes a founding member. Taking as its mission the recognition of New York's emerging talent, the Hansa opens on East 12th Street with a roster that includes Helen Frankenthaler, Larry Rivers, Jane Freilacher, and Fairfield Porter, among others. Jane has the first of her 3 solo exhibitions at the Hansa in 1953, with encouraging results. The show is reviewed in the Times and the Tribune. She sells 2 paintings and goes on to have 2 more shows at the Hansa before leaving the gallery in 1958, a year before it disbands. As Jane's career begins to take off, she and John are also very much part of the social excitement whirling around their growing cohort of young painters and poets. Reflecting on those frenzied times, John wrote that he and Jane ran around like crazy. We were everywhere. At the Cedar, the 2 Janes often gravitate together. Around the time when Larry Rivers purchases a modest house in Southampton in 1953, Jane and John, along with others among their downtown friends, discover the joys of escaping the city to spend summers on eastern Long Island. For Jane, the flat farm fields and low horizons, reminiscent of the low Iowa farmland of her childhood, have a special appeal. For several successive years, she and John share a house with Jane Freilacher, now one of Jane Wilson's best friends, and Freilacher's husband, Joe Hazen. Mingling with her abstract expressionist contemporaries at the Cedar Bar and elsewhere, Jane too is experimenting in that mode. She will be featured in a 1957 issue of Life magazine, along with Joan Mitchell, Nell Blaine, and Helen Frankenthaler, in an article titled Women Artists in Ascendance. It's considered a groundbreaking article for which she's photographed in her New York studio. By that time, Jane has already been turning away from pure abstraction. Asked later about the shift, she recalled, quote, "One day in the 50s, I just woke up one morning thinking about painting, and everybody is painting wildly, abstractly, and being very serious and macho. And I thought, look, I really like subject matter." Fairfield Porter, older, more established, and committed to modernist representation of painting, becomes especially important to her, encouraging and validating her surrender to the powerful urge to put subject matter back into her painting. Eventually, John will find his groove as a music and critic for the Herald Tribune, and will be in high demand as a writer about cultural topics for other prestigious publications. But in the first years of their marriage, he's composing art songs, a notoriously unprofitable enterprise, and struggling to find work suited to his wide cultural interests. From the mid-50s to the mid-60s, landscape and cityscape paintings dominate Jane's output. Of this period, she said later, in 1956, I found myself in one of those lucid moments that occurs every 20 years, and I realized I wasn't a second-generation abstract expressionist. I looked at the ingredients of what I was painting and felt an uncontrollable allegiance to subject matter and to landscape in particular. Having left 12th Street with its bare bone amenities behind by this time, the Gruens are living on East 10th Street opposite Tompkins Square. They also become parents with the birth of their daughter Julia in 1958, a joy that carries new responsibilities. Jane accepts remunerative work as a fashion model to support the family and her career as an artist. Though she seems to take this distraction from her work in stride, she's certainly aware of the prevailing attitude in the art world, which disdains fashion and believes that anyone willing to take a paycheck, especially in such a shallow environment, could not be a serious artist. Nor is she unaware of the macho bias against marriage in the 50s art circles. Reflecting later on the ways in which she was a bit of a misfit at Cedar Bar, she recalled that, quote, the most vocal of the women painters tended not to be married. There was a position taken, she said, that you could not be married and be a painter. It indicated you were not serious. Whether on a lark or with hopes of giving their budget a boost, Jane spends 7 frantic weeks in 1957 as a contestant on one of the most famous and ill-fated quiz shows of the 50s, the $64,000 challenge. One of her co-contestants is her friend Larry Rivers. In the end, Jane is not a big winner. For her 7 mad weeks, she receives a $1,000 consolation prize, countless cartons of Ken cigarettes, and a blast of public exposure that might boost the budget indirectly if it helps to sell more paintings. Rivers, on the other hand, wins $32,000. When the scandal hits and the show is revealed to have manipulated some of its contestants, Rivers admits to having been slipped an envelope with the questions beforehand, but he claims to have resisted any temptation to look inside. The decade of the 60s opens for Jane with decisive events in both her personal and professional life. The Museum of Art in 1960 acquires her painting, The Open Scene. Also in 1960, Andy Warhol commissions her to paint his portrait, which she calls Andy and Lilacs. And soon she's asked to join the New York's primary showcase for the younger generation of artists, the Tibor Denage Gallery. There she's again among friends, including Jane Freilicher, Grace Hardigan, Larry Rivers, and Fairfield Porter. With its purchase of The Open Scene, MoMA has not, and here we have The Open Scene. Oops, that's no. MoMA has not only signaled that Jane has become an important force in American painting, it pays her a handsome sum. Unexpectedly flush, the Gruens are almost immediately put in the path of temptation when they spy a beautiful 1920s carriage house in Watermill with a for sale sign. It is once again love at first sight, though Jane, never as impulsive as her husband, might have hesitated to turn their bundle over so soon to a real estate agent. She allows herself once again to be swept along by the force of John's ardor, and she will never have a moment's regret. Their Watermill home will become a vibrant gathering place for the Gruens' many friends who will come to party, to refresh themselves at the beach, to make mischief, and to spend long summer evenings talking, drinking, and feasting on seafood and corn on the cob. Here we have a glimpse of Jane's Watermill studio. And here's the gang gathered in Watermill. Most important for Jane the artist are the land, air, sea, and sky of Watermill, which will provide lifelong inspiration as she continues to evolve as a painter. There's a kind of light there, she tells interviewer Mimi Thompson in 1991, that occurs when you've got water on both sides. To capture its special effect, she's using a technique of layering wet paint on dry. Curator Klaus Curtis, in an essay accompanying a 1996 exhibition of Jane's paintings at Southampton's Parish Art Museum, credits her patient building of sometimes as many as 30 layers of wet and dry, with achieving the diffused, mysterious light recognizable in later paintings she's best known for. In the preface to his book, The 60s, Young in the Hamptons, John Gruen lists the friends who form the nucleus of the group most often gathered in Watermill. Several couples are on the list, including Jane Freilicher and her husband Joseph Hazen, poet Kenneth and Janice Koch, Anne and Fairfield Porter, and Larry and Clarice Rivers. When in 1960 Rivers hires the Welsh-born Clarice to take care of his children, the artist, who loves to shock with his unconventional antics, finds a match in his free-spirited nanny, and the Watermill nucleus gets a lively new member. Clarice is seen second row, second from the left in this photo. Of course, as Gruen acknowledges in the preface to his book, along with some genuine good times and harmless merrymaking, there could also be too much drinking, lots of pot smoking, some casual sex, and on occasion, some very real and quite ugly nastiness. Always following her own path, resisting the trend of the moment, Jane moves at her own pace to arrive at the moody landscapes with their big skies, low horizons, and palpable weather. To explain her unrushed approach, she tells Mimi Thompson, I like the slower approach, and adds that something in the way of working allows her, quote, to contact a lifetime of experience that I don't even know is there, putting one kind of non-color over another kind of non-color starts to bring out all kinds of familiar things. And the imagery that wheels out is one of weather and humidity and time of year and wind direction. All those things that a person doesn't think about that we walk in and out of every day. Jane Wilson exhibits steadily until her death of heart failure in 2015. In her long career, she receives many honors and widespread recognition for her luminous works, which glean praise from an impressive roster of prominent critics. The following is a sampling of their responses to her work. Michael Brenson, 1984. In these landscapes, the intelligence and will of the artists are so thoroughly interiorized in the pictorial struggle that the paintings are experienced by the visitor well before and long after they are really seen. In her own restrained way, says Paul Gardner, without any pomp or puff, Wilson represents what the art world is about, staying power, whatever the trend of the moment, and a consistently developing body of work that results in a steadily increasing reputation. Luc Sante, 1997. Any one of Jane Wilson's paintings is a marvel. The effect of a roomful is extraordinary. Together, Jane Wilson and the sky have made an encyclopedia of moods and textures and marks and palettes, delineating the immense multiple personality we collectively name weather. The sky, which has no memory of its own, is tremendously fortunate to have her as its portraitist, its analyst, its biographer. And with those elegant words of the critics, no better way